Good news can often get overlooked or buried by the negative in our everyday lives. So let's change that. I'm Adrianna.
And I'm Wyatt.
We're just two ordinary people without any special qualifications or anything trying to navigate life. We invite you to join us as we share wholesome stories, news articles of hope, and ideas about how we can all make the world just a little bit brighter. We are uplifting positive stories. Welcome back to another episode of Uplifting Positive Stories. We've got a very interesting topic today, overcoming differences.
Oh.
So here we go. Yeah.
Controversial episode, perhaps.
We do talk about some controversial things. Maybe not consequential, but controversial. So here we go.
What levels are we talking about? Like politics or like pineapple on pizza?
A little bit all across the board. We're just going to talk about today about how to overcome differences with people in our everyday lives, because it's something that we deal with daily. We always come across, especially with social media nowadays, you're always going to come across people with different opinions, different beliefs, different ways of doing things than what you think is the right way of doing things.
Especially now being in an election season, like
in the U.S.,
the differences are there. They exist. They'll never be free. They'll never not be a thing.
Yes. And this being a positive podcast, we're not going to dive into super controversial topics or anything like that. But we just think it's a good topic in this season to talk about because it's a very timely thing that's happening right now in our country and just in general in everyday life. So we're just going to kind of talk about it and talk about how do we deal with that and how do we deal with it in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. In a divisive political season of, a presidential election, we come here on our podcast to fix it all.
No, we're not going to fix anything. But, maybe you might take something from it. We might take something from it, from these stories, and be able to take something and move forward with it in a more positive way and a different way of thinking about things. So Here we go. We're going to dive into our first story for today, which comes from the Reddit thread, Random Thoughts.
Random. Okay.
Random. So here we go. The story says, my friend, who is male to female, dresses and did her makeup like Courtney Love in the 90s. Had a sugar daddy who was closeted. He didn't believe in trans and considered her a he. Old money and a former politician from the East Coast and way older. Total opposites attract. He invited her to a country club with him, and she invited me along because she was intimidated by the idea. I went, expecting to hate him. But all my preconceptions about sugar daddies and old rich white men went out the window. He was very kind, very respectful. He taught me a lot about food, Italy, art, growing grapes, life. He told me about his regrets in life and why he pretended to be straight. He talked to me about my friend. He would take us on day trips and we would discuss books and politics and recent plays we had seen. This was before I became a mom and had a life. He wasn't a user or a predator like I thought. He was very kind and realistic and respectful about his relationship with my friend and left her in better condition than when he found her. Until I moved to a different city, I considered him a good friend. I learned so much about seeing different ways of life from him. It was also the first time I really realized I could meet someone with different beliefs from my own, and that did not automatically make him my enemy. I can't think of him without thinking of his sorrows and regrets. Him pointing out the art on his walls, teaching me how to appreciate it, or standing with him among his grapevines on the hills beside his home. Old enough to be my grandfather, different beliefs, socioeconomic status, different race, but he became such a dear friend.
I feel like we've talked before on this podcast about having certain expectations of how certain people or groups of people are perceived. We have unconscious biases for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Whether we acknowledge them or not, they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just completely speaks to this situation where, some views were had and then they're kind of defied a little bit. And you kind of, it's, no, you don't want to shame people for like having those views, but you need to be willing to like look past whatever your preconceived notions are and like allow yourself to be open up to another perspective. And sometimes there are people who like fit perfectly in your expectation. That happens sometimes, but otherwise you can't always expect that to be the case. And you need to like let yourself be open to have your expectation be defined, because if they had just stuck to like, nope, my expectation is ironclad, cannot waver, they would have missed out on what seems like to turn out to be a marvelous friendship.
Yeah, exactly. And then talking about how he taught OP a lot of things. Sounds like they had a lot of discussions about politics and books and all these things. And obviously it was pointed out a couple times they have very different beliefs and different thoughts on things. So it sounds like they both kind of influence each other through their conversations and those discussions and their different interests that they were showing each other and things like that as well. And I think that sometimes we can be so like, oh, I want to surround myself with people that have similar thoughts to me or similar interests to me, that sometimes we kind of miss out on that ability to grow, I guess, in terms of our being willing to learn about different things or consider different ideas than our own. And obviously, it sounds like it was a very positive experience because of it. And that, in saying like what he said, that you could meet someone with different beliefs from your own, and that doesn't automatically make them your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And being open to that. And I know for me personally in life, this story kind of spoke to me because I have had experiences where someone has a very different belief than my own. And we've had some of my most favorite conversations that I've had that have been the most interesting are having positive discussions about that thing,
Mm-hmm.
and just sharing different insights and different reasons for why we think the way we do, and not trying to change the other person's opinion or mind.
Right.
But just having a conversation and discussion about it. Because sometimes they might say something that you're like, oh, that's an interesting point I've never considered. Huh. And sometimes it can actually bolster your own opinion in some ways. And sometimes it might make you change it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think being open to those kind of conversations in our daily life can sometimes lead to some of the most interesting and most thought-provoking situations, I guess.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. I know years ago, I want to say it was like pandemic era, working in news, I had to cover a story like in the middle of, I can't even tell you where it was in Minnesota. It was middle of nowhere, involved a rodeo. And everyone knows at the rodeo, I don't want to get too into the weeds of what political group or whatever, but they were very distrustful of my presence of being someone from the media, even though I was there just to cover the rodeo. And that was it. There was no real agenda.
Yeah.
But I was met initially with a lot of distrust, a lot of like, why are you here? Like, and like shouting their political views. And like, I have had negative experiences for sure. I was there long enough where eventually I was finally start talking to people. That's what I had to do, was try to get people to talk to me on camera.
Right. Yeah.
And that was really hard initially, but then eventually we were able to actually have a conversation, and I was able to, I don't even know how I did it, but I somehow proved I'm not trying to get you here. Like, I'm trying to just have a conversation, have you share your story. And I was actually able to get them to share their story. And maybe by the end of that, I didn't necessarily agree with a lot of things they were saying or like what their views necessarily were, but I could understand where they were coming from and their mindset, and kind of make that more of a relatable, the human element of conversation.
Yeah.
Versus just like reading it online or whatever, And that was a very eye-opening experience for me. And I've had several others before and since then, where again, like, it's not necessarily changing my specific views necessarily, but it's opening up to understanding what other people's views are. Like, hey, maybe that might not be my priority or how I view certain things, but I can understand that's why you would view it that way, or why you would prioritize A over Z, and vice versa. So it's just being open to that conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I feel like in today's world, it's very easy to try to demonize other beliefs and stuff like that, and being like, oh, they're a bad person if they think this way, or only terrible people think this, or whatever, like on both sides of any sort of topic, or, oh, this judgment towards this person if they do this or think this way. And so being able to kind of see their perspective and kind of humanize it, as you were just saying, and rather than just reading someone's like, this is what they think, but actually being able to talk to them and like hear it from them, it does humanize it more, and it definitely can make it more eye-opening and like, oh, okay, I still don't agree at all, but at least I can understand your rationale a little better. And I feel like the world would be a better place if we could do that. Unfortunately, not everyone is open to having positive conversations like that. Some people really do get heated right away with certain topics and stuff. So you have to be very mindful of that, unfortunately. But if we can, on our end, because we can only control ourselves, on our end, be open to it, then I think it can lead to really interesting conversations for sure. Like, I know, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And there is a time and place for it, and
100%.
And as well as, I think there's such a big difference between trying to actually have a real conversation in person versus internet forums or comment sections where it's devoid of that emotion, that back and forth.
That human connection.
it gets very it's not a real conversation. It's less
It
likely
can
to
be,
be a
but-
real conversation compared to you actually having, because I know I've had certain like friends and stuff like throughout my life where we're texting and we're messaging on Facebook or something, and it's just the most unproductive conversation ever that's getting heated and heated and heated, and it's just like it's escalating. Neither of us is getting the other, and it's just going in a horrible direction. And then we meet in person, and it's resolved almost instantly. Like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I get what you're talking about. Or I
Because
get
so
where
much
you're
gets
coming from.
lost over
Okay,
text.
gotcha. I'm still not agreeing with you, but I get what you're meaning, and
Yes.
you're not. Yeah.
You get the emotion behind
Yeah.
it. You get a lot more context for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then going off of that, I think it's also important when we have opinions and beliefs about certain things to really do our own research on the other side before getting heated about our own opinions. Because, for example, we both were in a class in a college that was argumentation.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the assignments was you had to pair up with another person in the class and you had to take a hot button issue, and both of you had to present completely different sides of the argument and then do a rebuttal against the other side.
Purely based on argument and the strength of the argument and evidence and no emotion, none of that stuff.
And it was funny because I remember I was assigned a topic to not have controversy. I won't say what it was, but I was assigned a topic and I was assigned the position that I do not agree with. And I was like, it was kind of a hot button issue for me where I was very vehemently against it. And I was like, I don't know how the heck am I supposed to make a good argument for this when I don't even agree with it.
Pretty sure most people in your class didn't agree with you.
They literally were telling me like, good luck.
luck.
Like, you're not going to convince the jury, because we had a jury that we had to try to get like to come on our side with the argument, just solely based on the way we presented the argument, not on the topic itself.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very hard when you have a biased jury that already feels very strongly about the topic. So I did a lot of research into this thing, and by the end, I wouldn't say it necessarily changed my view 100%, but all of a sudden I was finding things and learning about stuff that I had no idea about and that I had never heard of before. And so by doing that, I was able to understand people that have that stance a little better, and being able to be like, okay, I don't agree necessarily, but I can 100% now get what argument points these people have and understand their arguments a little bit better, so that I don't feel like, oh, if you feel like this, well, that's kind of not a nice view to have.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of made it a little bit more easily understandable to me. And so I think it's important for us to do that, even if it's a topic that you think that there's no way I'm ever gonna feel differently about it, just to look at the other side's arguments, like from a actual information standpoint, not just like opinions. I think sometimes it can help us to humanize it and not feel hate towards other people's opinions, because feeling hate towards other people, it's just not good for our soul. And it's hard, and I say that we're human. Like, we're gonna feel anger, we're gonna feel upset, and we're not gonna dwell on that too much in this podcast because I know it's positive, but I think it's important to address because it is such an important thing. And I think if we're gonna be positive, we have to address what's hard. And I think that's just something that we all need to work on. So
yeah, and going off of that, the only thing I'd add in regards to politics, because we're not getting into politics in that regard, but do your research, look from multiple sources. Don't just keep yourself trapped in one little bubble of one specific news source where you're getting all your information from. Spread out, look around, compile what is the through line of all those different news elements, and form your own opinion based off of it. Okay?
Yeah.
Do your research, and then have an open conversation then with people about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Respectfully.
Yeah.
Easier said than done, I'll admit.
It is very, very, very
It's sort of a message to myself as well.
I mean, every single episode we've ever done is a message to ourselves as well, because these are all things that we all ideally would like to be good at and like to have in our lives, and that we're just kind of always taking little steps towards, little baby steps.
Well, that can then spiral a whole other conversation, like, oh, the algorithm, what the algorithm gives you, that's why you gotta be a little proactive sometimes and look and don't just rely on the algorithm. But that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah. That being said, so Wyatt, you have a story for us now.
I do.
So I'm excited to hear what it is.
Let me pull it up. Okay.
Yeah.
It's one of those stories where, again, the title sounds a little negative, and there's a negative element too, but it comes ultimately from Best of Positive Updates.
Here we go.
Though it was originally posted on relationships.
Oh, okay.
Title goes, my 26 male girlfriend, 24 female, of 2 years always includes poetry in cards she gives me. I'm not into it.
All right. Let's see what happens here.
So there's already, just from the title alone, there's already disagreement
A
there.
little disagreement.
She's into poetry. He is not.
Well, and I feel like that's a common thing. Poetry is very divisive. Some people really like it. Some people
True.
don't.
I mean, that's
So-
true for a lot of art forms, but
Oh,
poetry
yeah.
especially, I
Yeah.
feel like, can be.
Very divisive.
And then within poetry itself, there's so many different kinds of poetry.
It's so true.
You
Yeah.
could like one aspect of poetry, but then hate another.
Exactly.
So
100%.
I'll start by saying I love my girlfriend. I think she's beautiful, intelligent, and very caring. We get along together extremely well. We moved in together after only 2 months, but have never had any major fights. We just work. It's a great feeling, which makes me realize that this gripe is minor, so I don't know how to address it. Every card I have ever received from my girlfriend, birthdays, anniversaries, Valentine's Day, etc., has included poetry. On one side, she'll write something short but sweet and thoughtful, which I like. On the other side, she'll write a few lines from a poem or other classical literature. I get that she is a librarian and literature is something she's studied extensively and cares about. Frankly, it leaves me cold. I was a STEM major and work in a scientific field now, and classic literature, especially poetry, do not interest me in the slightest. I figured she would pick up eventually that I don't care about the fancy words and much prefer her own, but my birthday recently rolled around and there was poetry in the card. She even made a point of repeating the passage to me. I asked her why she always felt the need to use someone else's words, but she just replied that the words were beautiful and she felt a connection to them and us. I don't know how to broach this topic without hurting her feelings. I would be fine if she just signed the card or no card at all. I love this girl, but I'm tired of the poems. TLDR, how do I tell my girlfriend to leave the poetic crap off when she writes cards?
Oof, that's hard. Because, like I said, poetry is so divisive, and I can completely understand where it maybe feels a little impersonal to OP because it just doesn't feel, they don't feel that connection to that more fanciful writing and that poetic terminology that they use and stuff like that. And I completely get it. I know I am not somebody that's super huge into poetry, so I can kind of understand where they're coming from, where they would prefer more just a personalized message. But I also see from his girlfriend's perspective that she feels a great connection to poetry, and maybe it expresses things in a way that she just can't find the words for, because sometimes, especially with poetry, sometimes it can just put things in a way that's like very much, it's just a beautiful way of presenting what you were feeling or thinking that you just don't have the words to do. So I can also understand that perspective. So trying to find a common ground between that doesn't hurt girlfriend's feelings is really, really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, harkening back to previous episodes we've had on communication, it's so key. Again, how you communicate is key.
Yeah.
You know, but also like try to open yourself up to what they're. Obviously, she has a different form of love language. Like
Yep.
you, or he's saying that he wants like more of her own words, which she
Maybe.
has some.
Yeah.
But she feels a connection to words that are already written,
Right.
and feels sharing them as kind of her way of expressing that in words in
Right.
ways maybe she couldn't fathom of coming up on her own.
It's like playing a song for somebody that the lyrics really hit
Mhm.
where you're feeling or stuff like that. So I completely get that. Maybe the compromise here would be to be like, hey, I know I appreciate that you like poetry and stuff, but maybe if you could have a little more personalized messages like that are just from you, that, cause I'd love to hear your voice in the card, you know, more than just someone else's words, which I appreciate that too. But, you know, it's maybe something
Mhm.
like that. I don't know. It's a tricky one because, you know, it probably means a lot to her putting that in there. And so it's also a vulnerable thing to do, trying to present your feelings like that. So I get that it's difficult, but I'm interested to hear what the update is.
Yeah, well, most of the comments are pretty overwhelmingly not in his favor.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not gonna read hardly any of them because they're mostly pretty
Pretty negative.
on him.
Yeah.
Though,
I feel like the line
general-
about it being poetic crap is a little harsh. So I can understand why they're maybe a little upset in the
Yeah.
comments, because that sounds a little brutal. Because again, it's a kind of poetry is a very vulnerable thing. Even if it's not from yourself, it can be a vulnerable thing. And so for her to present that is kind of putting her feelings out there, even if it's not directly her words.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is important to be very cautious when approaching the subject, but I think it's also important to state if your love language is different and that doesn't feel the same to you and it feels kind of removed and cold to you,
Mm-hmm.
to state that, because you're going to be with this person potentially for a very long time, if not forever. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to make sure that you guys are speaking the same love language, because you don't want to for years and years and years feel that way.
Yeah.
Nor would she want you probably to feel that way and not know that that's how you feel.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of the comments that I feel are not just saying
negative.
you suck, more or less. One comment says, dude, she's also including the part that you like, and you know this stuff is her life. Just let it go. It's not a big deal. That's a lot of the comments like, dude, calm down. This is not a big deal. This is kind of petty. Another comment said, it makes me sad to think of your girlfriend handpicking lines out of something she loves, hoping it will be appreciated as an expression of her feelings for you. And you saying, hey, babe, can you stop with the pochi thing? I'm not into it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other sad ones. One comment was extra sad, saying that they kind of crush me because I do this to my guy. Makes me want to ask that question now myself. I don't want to get my feelings hurt. He will tell it straight. So, yeah.
So there's a positive update.
There
you
is.
said,
There is.
so
I swear there is. I swear there is.
What is it?
6 months later, so it's in December of that year, when I posted last, I was pretty defensive because I did not expect everyone to call me names. But after I slept on it and swallowed my pride, I realized what a jerk I was being. I was so caught up on not valuing poetry that I didn't understand I would be saying I don't value her expression of love. I thought about how if I were in her shoes, it would hurt me to hear that. So thanks for the reality check. It prevented a major blunder on my part. While my girlfriend was out of town for the weekend to visit her sister, I took a trip to the library. I asked her colleague to help me find some mushy love poetry to woo her with. I spent 2 hours reading poems. I tried the stuff with more flowery language, but I had trouble grasping a lot of it. It was pretty frustrating. I ended up going with more straightforward language, which worked out well when I read it to her on our anniversary. She cried. I almost cried. It was more emotional than I anticipated. She said just reading it to her was the best present I've ever given her. It was a great moment. Edit. I just realized the way I wrote this makes it seem like I wrote a poem. I'm definitely not there yet. I just copied one from a book.
Aw, well, that's sweet. I like that it did a 180. And, sometimes it does take an outside perspective to kind of be like, hey, you realize that that's her way of expressing her love to you, and that by you kind of taking that from her, that could really, really hurt her. Like, sometimes it does take an outside perspective to kind of check you a little bit on your opinions and stuff like that, to be like, hey, just so you know, you might not be thinking about it this way, but this is an outside perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that OP got that and got that a little bit of check, and that they made the steps to try to show her love language and try to speak her language, even if it's not as natural. Because it's really hard. It's hard when there's something that just doesn't come naturally to you to put yourself out there and try to do that. And I completely can understand like the flowery language not feeling a little frustrating to connect to, I can completely get where they're coming from with that. Sometimes I remember I was in a poetry class in college, and I even remember being sometimes
you're an
like,
honors
oh
one,
my
so
gosh.
there's a whole different level of intensity.
Yeah, and sometimes being like, what is this saying? What is the meaning of this? Like, sometimes it is really, really hard. So trying to find an approachable angle by finding a more simplistic poem, I think, was a good way of going about it, and just speaking her love language. And then hopefully that'll inspire her to maybe put more personalized messages in there for you. By meeting them halfway, sometimes they'll meet you the other halfway, and then you both could be happy and feeling fulfilled. And that goes for relationships, that goes for friendships, that goes for any kind of relationship in your life. Our next story comes from Best of Redditor Updates, and the title is OOP surprises husband with favorite home-cooked meal.
Okay.
Here we go. I am not the best at keeping secrets, so it is killing me inside, and I wanted to let it out somewhere, so here I am. Yesterday, I overheard my husband talking to his friend over the phone about how much he missed his mother's homemade meals. We're both Indian, first-generation Americans. Since we got married a little over a year ago and moved in together, we've mainly been cooking easy-to-make meals. We split the cooking 50-50 and keep our meals as healthy as possible while trying out different stuff, but we barely dipped our toes in our own culture's cuisine. There aren't any Indian grocery stores near us, so it is hard to find certain key ingredients, but we figured it was no big deal and gave up on the idea. I had no problem with it, but I didn't know how much he was craving my mother-in-law's food until yesterday. Both of our families live in another state, so it's just us two. So I decided to call up my mother-in-law last night to ask her for the recipes of my husband's favorite dish. Once I wrote down everything I needed, I tried looking for the nearest Indian grocery store. 2 hours away. Yikes. However, I was in too deep to go back at that point, so I woke up at 5 a.m. today, about 6 hours before we normally wake up on the weekends, and drove to the store to get everything I needed. I made sure to buy in bulk so we could continue to cook more of our favorite meals for a while.
If it's 2 hours away, you better buy in bulk. You're not going there for 2 items.
Right. Once I got back at around 10:30, I made sure to check if he was still asleep before I brought the grocery bags in, and thankfully he was. So I hid the bags in an empty kitchen cabinet and acted as naturally as I could. Obviously, I needed him out of the house, so I called up one of his close friends to ask if he could hang out with him for a few hours, which he was glad to do. So now I'm home alone. I'm currently working on the recipe my mother-in-law gave me, and I have been struggling a bit, but I'm trying my best. I really hope he loves it, or at least appreciates my efforts in the event that it doesn't turn out or that great. Kind of nervous, though. If this gets any attention, I'll post an update.
You better appreciate the effort, even if it goes up in flames, not literal flames, but if that fails, he's better appreciate the effort. Just the driving alone is a lot.
2 hours for grocery shopping, yeah.
That's one way. So 4 hours total plus the time of actually searching the grocery store. I doubt it's necessarily intuitive.
Right?
I don't think she knew exactly where everything was in there when she ran in there. That's still a long trek. And then the actual act of cooking.
Exactly.
Which is difficult and challenging.
Exactly. So on to the update. I had finished cooking and setting the table a mere 10 minutes before he got home, so I started cleaning up the kitchen as I waited. I had the pleasure of seeing his reaction as soon as he walked in, since there is a perfect view of the front door from the kitchen. He was instantly taken aback because the aroma of most Indian food is very much distinct. His eyes shot back and forth between me and the food for a few seconds before he asked what was going on. He is usually very calm and collected, so it was very endearing seeing his emotions written all over his face. He reluctantly inched toward the food, and once the realization hit him that it was his mother's recipe, he wore an expression that I had never seen before. His voice cracked, and it turned into a sob when he thanked me and embraced me in a bone-crushing hug. I am still sore from it. He hasn't cried in front of me in months, so I was just as much, if not more, taken aback than he was. I was supposed to render him speechless, and there I was, at a loss for words. I didn't expect him to react that way, in all honesty, and I found myself tearing up too. He had expressed that no one had ever gone out of their way to do something this thoughtful for him, and it made my heart all mushy. Anyway, after we both calmed down and sat down to eat, he could tell I was anxious about him trying it, so he assured me that nothing could possibly ruin the night unless he gets food poisoning, but even then, he'd vomit his brains out with a smile on his face. His jokes always lighten up the mood, so I was grateful for that. And as it turned out, he enjoyed it. Albeit my cooking could never compare to my mother-in-law's, he called her up and expressed how happy he was that he got a taste of home after so long. He has been in such a good mood since then, and it really put a smile on my face. I have never really gone out of my way to do something this extreme for anyone before, but I didn't even give it a second thought, nor did I for a second regret the 4-hour drive, even with these gas prices right now. I'm just happy he loved the dish, and as many of you said, even if it hadn't turned out well, he would have still felt the same. I try my best to do nice things for him because he makes me the happiest wife ever. Also, for those curious as to what I made, it was halim and naan. He grew up eating it pretty often, and my mother-in-law's food is to die for. I wish I had taken a picture, but my phone had died by the time I was done cooking, probably because I kept hopping on here, lol. And my husband was too eager to dive in to even think of taking a picture of the food. To me, that just made the moment even more special.
Mm-hmm.
So
wait until he hears how much driving she did.
Yeah, I picked this story simply just because I think food is just such a thing that can be very also divisive. It wasn't necessarily in the story, but I feel like people have very different tastes in food and desire to put in time for food. Some people like to put a lot of time into cooking. Some people really don't. They just want to do fast and easy things. And so
yeah, who would want to do that? Who doesn't want to spend time cooking?
But it's one of those things that I think can cause a lot of division. Food can in a lot of places, and so I think it's important to acknowledge that like food is so important to people. It can really mean a great deal to people, and
Especially when
so
it's like home meals growing
that
up and
nostalgia
stuff.
and that comfort
Regardless
foods
of
and
your
stuff.
culture, like that's the thing that most people can relate to. Like, oh, I remember my mom's cooking of this or something. I grew up with this, even if it wasn't like objectively maybe not the best thing, but to you it means something and like
Right.
takes you back a little bit.
Yeah, and it's something that when you go into a relationship and stuff like that, you might have different tastes. You might not like the food that so and so grew up with. And so being able to bridge that gap and make efforts, even if it's not something that you would normally do, like, I mean, driving 4 hours to get food is a lot. And that's not something that you would do on the norm. To do that and show that I know it's important to you, even if it's not like my favorite dish and I wouldn't normally put 4 hours into this, I know how much it means to you. And I'm going to bridge that gap to make this for you because I know how much it means to you.
Mm-hmm.
One more quick story that goes into the topic of food and kind of goes along with this one. I like this story. It is from the subreddit Self, and it's called Be a Coconut. Yes.
I have follow-up questions.
Yes.
Starting
So the
with
story
why.
says, my mom passed last year. She was a
Oh.
talented baker and left us with a ton of her recipes. As a gift for my brother and adult nephew and myself, I had cutting boards made with their favorite recipe in her handwriting created as a keepsake. Super cute, by the way. That's adorable. My brother and I had our favorite special recipe that only my mom made. It's very unique, and I've never seen anyone else make anything like it. My nephew, on the other hand, picked this simple, no-brainer, low-rent cookie recipe that you can literally buy at any grocery store bakery.
Oldie but a goodie.
My nephew told me, you know why I picked that one? This one has coconut in it. Granny hated coconut, but she still made it for me because she knew I liked it. That's how much she cared. It hit me in the gut. So today I made those cookies for someone I love, and I thought about my mama.
Okay, definitely not an
I'm
oldie
getting
but
teary-eyed. That was really cute.
definitely not an oldie but a goodie. I'm not familiar with coconut cookies as
But
a
isn't that
common
sweet?
go-to.
Like, oh, as a way to remember her that she used to make them just because she knew that he liked it, even though she hated it. I'm like, oh. And then there was a follow-up comment that says, this reminds me of my mom. She made the best meatloaf. All my life, it was one of those meals everyone loved, plus the whole meatloaf sandwich thing. Towards the end of my parents' lives, I started going over for dinner every week. One week, it was meatloaf, and it was just my mom and I. I noticed she didn't eat hardly any, but had seconds of potatoes and beans and dessert. So I asked her, and she said she never really liked meatloaf. She just made it all the time because we all loved it so much. Another thing, like, food can be so important.
Well, it's a
to
labor of
people.
love. It takes time to
It
make
does.
these dishes.
Yeah, exactly. And so put all that time and stuff, if it's not something that you like, just because you know that someone else appreciates it and likes it, it's just, like I said, it's bridging that gap. It's showing that effort, even if you have a difference in taste and difference in opinions on things. And like, it's just something that, you know, if we can do this with food, we can do it in so many other things in life.
And it's a selfless act of love, you know, because again, you're not doing it for yourself. Like,
Right.
it's different when like you make a batch of cookies or you bake goods and you're like some of your favorite baked goods, you know, and you're going to eat a lot of them and then you're giving them to other people as well, you know. It's still
Right.
like nice that you're sharing and you baked for others, but like you're also getting some goods out of the deal.
Exactly.
But when really like you're not getting anything out of it. Like,
Right.
you really don't like it.
Exactly. Our next segment we're going to go into are some controversial questions that some people have probably strong opinions on, but we're going to talk about them and we're going to share our opinions. So I'm curious to see if we have disagreements on these or if we agree. I don't know. We'll see.
You're not gonna trick me with like we're gonna do like quick fire questions and you sneak in something like it's really hard and heavy and like
No.
do a gotcha.
None of these are too hard, but they're interesting. They made me think. So we'll get right into it. If I can, I'm gonna try to put a poll on the YouTube video, and we'll see what you guys all think on these. Cause I am curious. I'm curious what people think. Should you brush your teeth before or after breakfast?
After.
See, I would say before.
Technically, you're supposed to do it after.
Are you?
Yeah, that it recommends like when you brush your teeth after any time you eat.
See, I guess mine is like I'm always worried about having morning breath, and like I just the first thing I do when I get up is I want to brush my teeth because I'm like bleh, my mouth just tastes weird.
I mean, you can do both, but
You could.
it does recommend doing it after, especially if you're like me and you're a coffee drinker in the morning. You should probably do it after.
Yeah, that's
Because
fair.
otherwise you're going to have coffee breath.
Is listening to an audiobook the same as reading?
No.
No?
No. Using a different part of your brain to read words. I'm not saying that it's not valid.
True.
I love audiobooks. I think it's especially, I don't know, it's hard to find time to actually sit down and read, but you're using a different part of your brain to actually actively read the words and
Read the
visualize.
words, but I mean, you're still visualizing with an audiobook, though, aren't
Right.
you?
No, I'm not saying, okay, when I say they're not the same, I'm not trying to take away from the value of an audiobook. I just think it uses different parts of your brain to be reading it on a page. The visual aspect of your brain versus the audio. That's all I'm saying. I think they're different.
Huh.
Not less valid, just different.
Interesting. Huh. All
Like,
right.
I've listened to a few audiobooks, but I'll not then say that I have read that book because I have not. I've listened to
But
that
you know
book.
the story, though, then.
I do know the story. I do.
So isn't that
And
kind of the
sometimes
same
it's more
as having, like, consumed a book?
It's just different. I don't know. It's almost like watching a movie, but without the video. Especially because some audiobooks. There was one a couple I listened to that were like older public Star Wars ones that they literally added like sound effects and music,
Yeah, they're getting
and it was like a whole
like a production nowadays.
Yeah, this whole audio production. Like, this is not a book. Like, I mean, obviously it's the words of a book. It's the story of a book. So I have the story of the book. I've ingested the story of the book, but I'm not taking active reading, flipping through the pages. And I say
Yeah.
to someone who's not a big reader.
I guess
I'm not
it
going to claim I'm
it
a reader.
depends, I guess,
when
on like what the important thing is in reading for you. Like for if it is like the being able to have like the physical, because some people even like having a Kindle is not the same as having like a physical book. You know, it's just a very different experience for some people. For me, I would say like the most important thing for a book is the imagination aspect. You know, being able to like imagine what you're reading and like create these visuals in your head that you're
But
not being
also
supplied. So
creating voices in your head too.
right.
But now they're being presented to you in audio form, and now you have a
So,
hear
yeah,
for what that voice sounds
I can
like.
see both sides to this question. It's an interesting
Again, I'm not
question.
taking away from like the merits of an audiobook,
Yeah.
and I have enjoyed a good audiobooks. I'm slowly inching my way at Andy Serkis doing the voice reading for Lord of the Rings, because Andy Serkis is great, and I like hearing his voice characters doing the voices and stuff. It's fun, but it's still not quite the same as reading. Reading it would take me forever.
Yeah, I get you. Should you make your bed every day, or is it just an unnecessary chore?
Should you? In your own house? Why though? Why? No one's seeing it. I mean, have it just. I mean, I'd say make it enough so it's not like a disorganized mess where now you're like
Like a
okay, where the
lump.
hell is the blanket now?
Yeah.
Like, where's the edge and corner to this? Like, you know, like, make it easy enough for yourself to be able to get into it later.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be like super fanciful and like triple
See,
folded or something. I
It
don't
brings
know.
me joy to have the bed be done before I get into bed. Like I
Okay,
will
that's
say that
fine.
like if I had time to do it, like if I had more time, I mean it probably takes like a minute. So I'm making excuses. I could do it. But like I feel like if I had more time in my day, I probably would do it. But I
And
also
energy.
feel like I don't have the time or energy a lot of days to do that, just because I have so many other things going on. And I'm just kind of in a rush in the
I'm
mornings.
not gonna war against the idea of doing it. I just don't think you need to.
Yeah, some people it's a big thing.
I mean,
so.
growing up, I feel like it's a good thing to teach habit-wise. You know,
Yeah.
just the general care of. You know, as a kid, you don't have a house to take care of, so your
So
room
it's
is
your one
your
thing.
room is the closest thing you have to like practice house
Yeah,
maintenance.
that's
you know?
fair. That's fair.
And then when you move out of your room into an actual house, I think you have the freedom to, hey, I've earned allowing my room to fall into disrepair a little bit.
Yeah.
to a certain extent.
It was just funny because I remember we were doing the shoe game at our. We did a co-ed bridal shower and we did this shoe game. It was like, who makes the bed? And neither of us put our hands up. We were like, It was really funny.
Listen, that's the truth. I'm willing to bet that most couples
Probably
that don't have people coming in and out of the room, which I don't know why you would unless you're really proud of your room. Doesn't make.
I
it
don't
on a
know.
daily
We'll find
basis.
out, I guess, if we do a poll and people give their answers. We'll see. All right, next question. Should you always follow a recipe when cooking, or is it okay to improvise?
So now, okay, this is the other two different questions. If it was, should you?
It
Not
says,
necessarily.
should you?
I will only follow the recipe because that is my only path to feeling like
Success.
I'm. That's the thing I find maddening about cooking is that I'm a very like follow the directions precisely
Hey,
kind of person.
that's cool.
So anytime you tell me like, oh, like a pinch or like not a pinch, like very ambiguous, like, oh, like small amount. Like, no, I need like measurements.
Give
like
me
you
like
cannot
tablespoon, cup, like
I
where?
need exact. I need a mathematical precision here, which, I feel like the really good cooks, like that takes all the heart and love out of it. There's some people out there that cook, they're like, I just throw in this much and whatever feels right, And
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I mean, if you're a confident cook and I don't know, if you're a walking disaster of your recipes, maybe you should start following the recipes. So I guess it depends on the person. I know
Depends on the
for
person.
me, I need to follow the recipe.
Yeah,
or
I'd
else
say
I
I
will lose my
usually do
mind.
too.
But, I don't think you necessarily have to. I guess it depends.
Yeah, I think it depends too. Emojis or smiley faces in professional emails or no? I would say yes. I wouldn't do emojis though. I would just do
not
like
emojis.
I would say no to emojis. I would say yeah to smiley faces. I use smiley faces in almost every email, to be fair.
Would say, well, I don't know. For like my jobs and my employment, I would not.
Really?
But, yeah. Well, also there was like a Slack channel as well where things can be a little more like emojis and like more memes and stuff like that. It's a little more less profesh. But for our business, when we're communicating with couples for weddings and stuff, we definitely throw in smiley face and stuff and make it more personal and less corporate-y and yada yada. It's less of a, but it's also a different environment.
I also just in general do smiley faces.
In terms of the professional like work environment, I'm working for. I have a bunch of coworkers and management and stuff. I don't.
Interesting. All right. Can you call someone without a warning text, or is that a breach of etiquette? Made you think.
Well, it's weird. I used to call people a lot more often when I was
younger.
Yeah,
same. Well, because text wasn't so commonplace now.
No, it was, but
right. But I feel like at that time people were more used to calls.
I'm not really sure what changed. It just kind of gradually moved further and further away from being comfortable with phone calls.
Yeah, I would say it depends on the person for me. Like, if it's one of my parents, like I don't need a text or whatever. But like, I appreciate a text if it's from like people that don't normally call me. Just because like that I'm prepared mentally, like, oh, okay, we're gonna do a phone call, just because I don't know, like
I would say it depends on the time of day as well. Like if I get a call during my working hours, I'm working, and so I would appreciate if you would send a text like, hey, is now a good time to talk.
Yeah. I think that's even more so the part of it is just that nowadays with being so busy and stuff, like most people's lives are so crazy that it's hard to find that time where both of your schedules align for a phone call, because those are usually a little bit longer. Because also sometimes nowadays, because phone calls just aren't as common for most people, like if someone were to call you out of the blue, you might think that there's something wrong. I don't know. I don't think it's a breach of etiquette. I just think that I know for like most things, it just feels easier to text just to make sure, just that you're both on the same page about the time of it, and you're not doing an inconvenient time or anything like that.
I would like it if we can move back towards normalizing phone calls.
Yeah.
Not saying that, okay, I am in the camp that where it would stress me out if someone called me right now, but I missed that time where I wasn't scared of phone calls.
Yeah, right.
I'd like to have us veer back.
What happened as a society? Yeah, I get you. But yeah, these are just some fun questions that are pretty inconsequential. But yeah, people could have different opinions. You might have a very different opinion than the ones we've expressed here. So I just think it's interesting to talk about, and just kind of a good example of having those conversations with people. Because sometimes you might hear a different side of something that you never even considered, even if it's a very inconsequential question. Like, do you like pineapple on pizza, and why or why not?
Or are you indifferent?
Exactly. If you hear a different opinion or a different way of doing things, you might be like, oh, maybe I'll give that a try and see if I like that better. It's just a good little, I guess, icebreaker kind of activity that I thought would be kind of fun. So anyways, last thing is our quick article. It's very fast, but I just wanted to put it in there because it's very sweet. So some good news from BBC.com. One of the world's rarest cats is no longer endangered. You may have heard of the Iberian lynx. And the Iberian lynx, in 2001, there was only 62 mature individuals in the wild. Now, there are more than 2,000, thanks to a lot of conservation efforts. So, apparently, they used to be very common across the Iberian Peninsula, but from about the 1960s on, those numbers started to dwindle. To quote the article, it says, habitat loss, poaching, and road accidents helped push the species to the brink of extinction. But yeah, a lot of conservation efforts, including trying to also save an endangered species, the wild rabbit, known as the European rabbit, by doing that and helping their food source come back. I'm assuming probably trying to stop captivity / poaching of lynxes and stuff like that from what I'm seeing in this article. It's one of the greatest recovery of a cat species ever achieved through conservation according to the article. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal.
What was the timeline on that?
So 2001, there was 62 mature individuals, and now it is up to 2,000.
So 24 years or 23
years. Yeah.
Huh?
So, like I said, one of the most successful conservation efforts of a wild cat species in history. So
That's impressive.
Yeah, and I mean, lynx are a really cool cat. I mean, if you've ever seen a lynx, they're pretty beautiful cats, and like it's just really, really cool seeing. I don't feel like we usually hear when species come off the endangered species list. So there's a lot of that happening. We just tend to only hear about the ones that have entered the endangered species list. So kind of fun to share when there's a positive situation where they're no longer on the endangered species and things are trending upward. So yeah, if you want more details on this story, there is more in the article. Feel free to check it out in the description below. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Uplifting Positive Stories. Please tune in next Wednesday. Our next Wednesday's topic is knowing your worth. And we've got some really great stories for that lined up as well. So if you have any positive news stories, positive stories from your own life or other people you know, or just topics you want us to talk about on here, please feel free to share them on our Reddit thread, Uplift Positive Stories, but you can share them directly to us at our Gmail, upliftingpositivestories@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear them. Thanks so much for joining us and have an awesome rest of your week.
And stay positive.